What is going on, guys? Craig 12v7 here, bringing you yet another episode of my VR Essays series, in which I kind of just talk about things that I've noticed happening, trends going on within the VR industry, and just try to get a discussion going. So this, I believe, is episode 5, and in this one, and I'm continuing my shooting of outside where the weather is just beautiful. So hopefully, again, the audio is not too big of a problem. So let's get right to it. This one I want to talk about one trend that's been around for a few years, since TVs and consoles started going into the 720p, 1080p kind of. That is a big freaking bird that just landed over there. You know, we've gone into that HD era for the consoles, and one of the big trends has been to do HD remakes or remasters or reimaginings of previous games. And so it's happened to a lot of games, and it also happens to a lot of collections. PlayStation, a lot of their things like Sly Cooper and the Ratchet and Clanks and things like that, they get these HD remasters, and I mean, some people love them because they get to relive some of the games that they enjoyed playing when they were younger, and now their kids can play them with that kind of, they don't have to introduce them on an actual PlayStation 2 or something like that, where the visuals don't hold up as well. So, you know, some people love them for that. Other people hate them because they just see them as these developers or publishers milking their client base again to they're getting money out of them again. So, you know, I personally, I don't really care. I don't think they're that negative. I think it's nice that they do because backwards compatibility is a problem on the consoles. But again, you know, being able to play something that was so fun back in the day, again with the visual update, granted the gameplay mechanics and things like that may not have aged and still translate poorly into the HD remake, but still it's nice getting to replay those kind of things. So I think they're kind of nice, and the people that don't want them are not going to buy them, and people that do want them are going to buy them. So it's kind of like with microtransactions and DLC. It's not really something that scares me all that much. I'm glad that it's out there for people who actually do want to purchase those kind of things. So what I wanted to talk about for this episode was that kind of trend of, you know, the HD era came about and everybody was remaking them for HD. Do we want that? And is that already here for VR? It's kind of already here. The Croteam guys, the Croteam developers that made the Talos Principle and more well known for making the Serious Sam games, they did the HD versions of the first encounter, second encounter, and things like that. Then they've now also done VR versions of all those classic games. So you've got Serious Sam VR, the first encounter, Serious Sam VR, the second encounter. They're going to be making a VR version of Serious Sam 3 BFE, and they're also going to be doing a VR version of Talos Principle. And so they've been really pushing it, and I thank them for it. The games they're such a great match for VR because they've kind of always been a wave-based shooter where you're not actually just sitting there taking the waves, you're more moving through the waves. It's just kind of always been how that gameplay is. And so they're a perfect match for VR. They've really helped to push and show that touchpad movement is something that we can do. And even jumping, where you squeeze the grip and to jump, that players can take that. That it's not going to make 100% of people hurl and throw up when they're doing VR using touchpad locomotion at very fast speeds. So I really do love that they've been doing that, and I purchased their games, you know, without even seeing reviews. I just want to help support them. But other developers have done that. Mostly, though, it's come from the modding scene. People, they did that. One of the most well-known ones was Doom 3 BFG edition. I almost said BFE, but that was Serious Sam. A lot of BFs. And so yeah, that came out, and that mod, that VR conversion mod, was a huge thing for the VR scene around that time. Like it was almost every post on /Vive and /Oculus. and slash virtual reality on Reddit was about this mod, and every time an update came out for it, everybody was talking about it. And Half-Life. Recently, we saw a trailer for the team that is working on the Half-Life mod. Now, there's already been one out where you can use a gamepad, and the guns and everything are still stationary like they are in the game, but you can actually like look around the world in 3D. But they're coming out with an updated version of it where you actually can, when you're holding the gravity gun or the energy mug, that when you're moving your Vive controllers, you know that it fully supports room scale and motion controls. So that's a big thing, because I'm always looking for an excuse to replay through Half-Life 2. I love that game so much. So seeing that one, there's also the Penumbra games. A guy in the mod community, again, he doesn't work for the guys that make Penumbra and Amnesia. I can't remember the name of their studio. I apologize. But yeah, he made Penumbra in a mod to make it VR motion, room scale and motion control accessible. So a lot of it's been coming out of that, but then we also have Bethesda, probably one of the biggest things coming out this year. It's going to be showcased at E3 coming up soon, and AMD just recently did an article saying, or an interview, and they were saying that it's going to be like the system seller for VR, and that it's what's going to convince so many people that this is why VR is going to be the future. And so yeah, they're going to be releasing a VR version of Fallout 4. So we haven't seen anything yet, but with the amount of time they're taking with it and the amount of stuff that's been stirred up about it, it's going to be full-on motion support. Pip-Boy, I'm hoping you can actually just look at your Pip-Boy and interact with it by interacting with the screen like that. That Pip-Boy is made for VR support. The mech suits and stuff like that, it's just going to be so interesting to see how they do that. But Fallout 4 was one of the biggest games of the year when it released. As with all Bethesda games, whenever they come out with a new Elder Scrolls or Fallout, huge hit. And so to see a big AAA studio, Croteam, they've been doing this, but Croteam is not as big as EA's, Activision's, and BioWare's, and those really big developers. So seeing Bethesda, one of the biggest developers out there, seeing them take the VR risk and going so into it, and not just, hey, here's a 3D update or whatever, now you can see the game in 3D. Like, they're going full on with it. To see them taking that kind of risk is going to be a big thing. If it succeeds and they actually do ship new versions, and it's also unclear, is it going to be an update? If I already own Fallout 4, is it just going to update my Steam version to be VR ready, or am I going to have to buy a separate one? So probably going to be the separate one. With Skyrim, they did that Skyrim update, mostly for the consoles, but PC guys, if you already own Skyrim, you got the new version for free. So could it be something like that, to where you get the VR version for free if you already own it on Steam? Seeing as how long that game has been out, Fallout 4, I think they might be selling it as a whole separate thing. Are mods for Fallout 4 on the PC version going to be easily ported over? That's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, so a lot is going to happen when that Fallout 4 comes out. It's going to be a big impact in the eyes of other publishers and developers into can we actually start putting up millions of dollars, multi-millions of dollars, to make VR games, especially a new VR game. This is just converting an old game into a VR game. So is this something that we want, for developers to continue porting their old 2D flat games into VR? Personally, I would love to see more. Again, or not again, but I do want to say that I don't want that to become the only thing that happens. I want developers, these classic traditional AAA developers, I would love for them to make new things in VR, obviously, from the ground up, to truly take advantage of VR, the things that you can do in VR that you just cannot do in traditional gaming. I'd love to see that, but bringing in more money for them, and that money could potentially go to them making original VR content. That's definitely a potential. That's another reason why I'd like to see these kind of remakes, is because it's another source of revenue for these publishers, for these developers to make something. It's a tricky thing, because some people, they don't want that to happen because they don't want that to be the only thing these developers are doing. Some people don't want it to be that way because, again, building something from the ground up for VR can offer so much more than something that is just converted into VR. If people try it out, then they might have this mindset that, why is this in VR? When this developer comes out with a game that is a VR exclusive, that's stupid. I don't think that's smart. They're limit, and they're not going to really truly see that if they play a game built from the ground up for VR that does stuff that you cannot do in traditional game, then they actually can really see, like, okay, yeah, I've never done this kind of stuff. I've never interacted with my environment in this kind of way. And then they really see, like, why VR is going to be amazing. But if they just play the VR conversion of an old game, it's still that same old game. Nothing really has changed mechanically, other than the fact that you can now aim your guns a little differently and whatnot. But it's hard. It's a difficult thing to talk about. So there's that little risk of people getting into it. It's like if I handed somebody a Google Cardboard on a phone and had them try that out, and that first impression that they have with Google Cardboard in a game that doesn't actually have a gamepad support, but all they know is this is VR. This is what, Craig, whenever you talk about how awesome this is, on your $2,500 computer with your $800 Vive and all this stuff, you put all that money into it, and you have to have this room that you're doing it in with a certain amount of space, but then they go and try this. For them, that is the same VR that I have been doing, is this Google Cardboard, and that's what they're going to make that connection with, that whatever they're seeing in Google Cardboard being played off of a phone without an actual device that's tracking, and there's nothing tracking. They don't have motion controllers. They're not using room scale. They just know that this is it. That's what you've been bragging about. That's what you've been always talking about when we're hanging out. Oh man, I just tried this new raw data thing, and all this stuff was happening. It's like, but this is just dumb. It was like I was just watching a movie in 3D, and it kind of reacted to my neck turning and whatnot. So we got to run that. We would run that risk of people just experiencing VR versions of games and being like, well, this is just the same game, but with a 3D monitor that's pressed up against my face. I don't really feel like I'm actually interacting with this game differently. So that's a problem that can happen. But in the other way, and this is one of the things that I hope is going to be the case, people are so familiar with these games already in the 2D flat space. I can have somebody sit down and play Serious Sam on my computer with a mouse and keyboard, and they're like, all right, cool, yeah, I'm familiar with this. I know what this is. I've played Serious Sam, or when Fallout comes out, so many millions of people that are so familiar with Fallout 4 and how it worked and how they interacted with the Pip-Boy and how they did the map screen for it, how they did the communications with NPCs and stuff, the way that they interacted with everything. Then something that they're so familiar with, they're going to be experiencing it in VR. Again, not from the ground up with VR, but they're still going to be experiencing something so familiar in VR. It's something that gives them a relation. They can relate that to something that, oh, this is the thing that I've got 200, 400, 1,000 hours logged into Fallout 4. They can actually relate to and have something to compare the traditional 2D experience that I've got so many hours into, and now this new VR thing. It's like, wow, this is so much better. Aiming my guns is just so much cooler, and interacting with my Pip-Boy by actually looking at my wrist and holding it up and doing that. It could be a big game changer for them. I think that's why Job Simulator was such a success in using it as a game to showcase to people for when they're trying VR for the first time. Not only because it's a safe game to play, that it doesn't have a lot of fast movement and stuff, but they're doing actions and things. Maybe I shouldn't film outside. I got bees and bugs attacking me. But it was something that yeah, I've cooked food in real life. I've made a sandwich in a kitchen in real life. I have worked at a convenience store and interacted with like a cash register, and I've opened shelves. I have, you know, opened up the hood of my car and worked on a car. You know, it's all these. I've worked in an office. You know, I've sat in a cubicle. I've worked with a printer and a keyboard and a computer, and I've used a vending machine. You know, all these actions were stuff that you were doing in Job Simulator, and then they were doing these things in VR. And at some point, their brain clicks and makes this connection. They realize, like, wait, this whole time I've been doing these VR things, and at no point did I have to like read an instruction manual from the game. At no point did it have to tell me this is what you need to do to make the sandwich. You know, they have the guidelines, and like you got to put the cheese on first, and then the meat, and you got to specifically have these things because that's what the customer wants. You know, but that's related to real life. When you're a chef, when you're a cook at a fast food restaurant, and somebody orders a number 7 with just cheese and ketchup, no mustard and onions, you know, that's a specific thing that you have to do. And so it was things that they were just doing naturally, and the game didn't have to explain this is how you do that. And so I feel like that's why that was such a great game to demo to people, because the actions that you're doing, people could relate to them in real life. That people have done hundreds and thousands of hours of doing these actions in their real lives. And so for VR, by doing these VR conversions, I feel like that could be a similar thing. That, you know, somebody that played Doom 3 so much, somebody that played Fallout 4 so much, somebody that played Half-Life 2 so much, or the Penumbra games, you know, we've played those games, and we got so used to exactly or we got used to experiencing what it was to play these games, and now we're playing them in VR, and it's just like, wow. You know, the ways I'm interacting with this have changed now, and the way I'm experiencing it, the fear factor, you know, in something like Penumbra, how tense it can be. You know, I feel like it can have a really beneficial aspect. So I personally, I welcome these VR conversions. I welcome the fact that they can be more revenue for developers, and that they can allow for developers. It's less risk because you're not having to make a whole new game. So you're not, you know, if it bombs, you know, they're not losing as much. But if it succeeds, they're making a good bit of money and didn't have to spend so much money. So it's a great way for developers to start getting into the VR scene. And it's a great way to just get people who have been on the fence, or at least just straight up have a negative bias towards VR. It's a great way for them to actually get in there and see how VR can change the way that they have played the games that they've been playing. So, yeah, there you guys have it. That's another episode for VR essays. Again, I hope the sound and audio and the wind and stuff haven't been too big of a hassle. But yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on this? Do you welcome these VR remakes, these VR reimaginings? Are you scared the developers are going to see them as an easy way to just here's some 3D support in the game, and they're going to put crappy porting? You know, we already have that problem right now with ports from consoles to PC or PC to consoles, that they don't do a proper job of going from gamepad to mouse and keyboard, or mouse and keyboard to gamepad. So that's something that we got to worry about is bad ports from VR to non-VR, or non-VR to VR. You know, is that something the developers are gonna get lazy in because they just want to make a quick buck off of selling their game again? So yeah, it's hopefully gonna be a good thing. As with anything VR related, I just want it to succeed. You know, I want to keep supporting these people that are taking these risks in a new unknown industry. So I just want to keep supporting these guys, but we got to hold people accountable, and we gotta anticipate what the masses are gonna think about when we release these things. So hopefully developers are taking note, and I'm sure they are, or publishers at least. I'm sure they're reading studies and looking at sales figures and things like that. So you know, Fallout 4, when it comes out soon, I cannot wait to play that, and hopefully show you guys some really good content with that. I think it's coming out. Well, it's going to be showed at E3. I'll be working at the summer camp that I always work at, but when the game actually releases, hopefully I can get a lot of good content out there and show you guys the you know, some good comparisons between the traditional way of playing it and the VR way of playing it. So, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Be on the lookout for more VR essays. Have a good one. Ta-ta.